Welcome to our review on the circulatory system. So the first thing we really need to know is what actually makes up the circulatory system. And there are four parts you really need to remember. In the very centre of it all, we've got our heart, and connected onto that we've got all these different blood vessels, the arteries, the veins and the capillaries. Now what we actually find is that the human circulatory system is what's called a double circulatory system. And the whole reason behind that name is because if you think about what happens as blood goes around the body once, then it's actually going to pass through the heart twice. So that means that the heart is going to pump the blood twice on one circuit. As a result of that, what we find is that the blood ends up at a much higher pressure than it would under a single circulatory system where the heart only pumps it once. The second term that we could have associated with the circulatory system is that it's a closed system. So that just tells us that the blood remains within the vessels the whole time. So another couple of terms that we need to be aware of the meanings for are oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So when we're talking about oxygenated blood, this is where the oxygen has bound to the hemoglobin to make this substance called oxyhemoglobin, and that's then able to transport the oxygen around our body. Deoxygenated blood is where we've got no oxygen bound to our hemoglobin. So one of the common things that everyone thinks from looking at the diagrams like the one on the bottom left there is that deoxygenated blood is blue, and that's completely incorrect. It's actually the purple colour, which is what you can see in those flasks on the right hand side. The one on the left is your deoxygenated blood, which is that dark purple colour, whereas the one on the right is the oxygenated blood, so that really bright vibrant red. So we mentioned that in our circulatory system there are three different types of blood vessel, which are the arteries, the veins and the capillaries. So we need to know a couple of basic facts about them first of all before we look at them in more detail. So if ever they're asking you what vessel takes blood away from the heart, then that would be the arteries, and they leave the heart under high pressure. When it returns to the heart, it's always carried in veins, and then any time we've got exchanges occurring between the blood and any form of tissues or cells, then that will always be through the capillaries. So make sure you remember arteries go away from the heart, so A for arteries, A for away. Veins bring blood back to the heart, and then we have these exchanges taking place in the capillaries. So if we look at these blood vessels in more detail, first one is the artery. Now what we find is that the arteries are really distinctive because when you look at the pictures of them, on the left you've got the diagram, on the right the microscope image, then what we can see is they've got this very thick muscular and elastic wall. And the reason behind that is they've got to be able to withstand the high pressure of that blood being pumped out of the heart. And what we find is that because we've got those elastic fibres within the wall there, then it can expand with the force of each contraction, and then it will recoil, pushing the blood forwards. So it's vital to its actual function there. So make sure that you remember that the artery will always have that thick outer wall and the thick layer of the muscle and elastic fibres. Our second type of blood vessel are the veins. Now you can see in the pictures there that they look very different to the arteries. What we can see is that veins have this much thinner wall and this larger lumen, which is the space the blood actually travels through in the middle there. What we find, because the veins are bringing blood back to the heart, then that blood is under much lower pressure. So it's not just going to be able to rely on pressure alone to keep it going in one direction. So instead, veins have the little adaptation of having valves present within them. So valves are just like a little flap of skin that only allows the blood to go one way. So it stops the backflow of blood. One of the key questions that they used to ask about this is the fact that they would give you two images of one of an artery, one of a vein, and then they tell you that so-and-so thinks that structure A is an artery, and they'd ask you to say whether they were right or wrong. Now, you've got to justify your answer here, and this is actually a comparison question. So where they give you two images and ask you obviously to identify one as opposed to the other one, you need to be able to use those comparative terms. So don't just say it has a large lumen or it's got a thin wall. Make sure that you say that the vein has a thinner wall than the artery. So use that little ER on the end to show that it's being compared to the other one. So our third and final blood vessel are the capillaries. Now, this is, as I said, where the exchanges are taking place between the cells and the blood. So to allow that to happen, they have these semi-permeable walls. So semi-permeable just means that some substances can cross them, but not all. And those walls are only a single cell thick. And hopefully we remember from earlier on in B2 that when we've only got a very short diffusion distance, then that means that diffusion happens faster. So we've only got that one cell thick wall in order to make diffusion happen nice and quickly.